Hey, Jared.
Hello, Matt. How are you, brother?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
It's good to talk to you.
Likewise, always.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is the place where members of the law enforcement community share their wisdom and experience through me, the chaplain, so that they can encourage others who wear the badge. Today, we're bringing back Matt Domyancic. He's a former LEO and police chaplain in California and was previously a guest on episode number 18. I was eager to bring him back to talk about patrol chaplaincy, a term that we're using here to describe the chaplaincy work specifically focused on the wellness of the rank and file in law enforcement. Today, we talk about competing styles of police chaplaincy and why this particular approach, which we are advocating, needs to be given more attention. Be warned, this episode does take a critical look at some of the failures of chaplaincy. It might even address the reason why your agency used to have chaplains years ago, but doesn't have them anymore. I hope that this episode challenges and inspires men and women to do the hard work of a patrol chaplain. Here is Matt Domyancic. So the reason I wanted to talk to you today is because you and I have something in common. We are both trying to encourage a different kind of chaplaincy, a different kind of police chaplain. Can you maybe give me a rundown for the lay of the land as it is right now? What kind of chaplains do we typically see out there in the wild?
Well, my experience both as a cop and as a police chaplain and talking to cops across the country through my various networks is from a cop's perspective, most chaplains are, with the greatest of intentions, focused primarily on the community. Okay. So if they're willing to go on a call out, it's a call out for a suicide, a car wreck, accidental death, something like that.
They're going to help the victims and the victims' families.
And if they go to the station, they immediately go to the captain's office and hang out with supervisors, which then alienates you from patrol because, hey, if the chaplain's buddies with captain, major, or lieutenant, like, I'm not going to open up about my personal life because I don't want to risk the chaplain, sharing anything, even though it's, supposed to be confidential.
Right.
And I don't even know who that chaplain is.
Do you think that some chaplains go to the commanders because of age? That chaplains themselves are middle-aged people and they are going toward the people in their 40s and 50s?
That's an interesting perspective I never thought of.
Like they're not comfortable with the 25-year-old, so they gravitate toward the 50-year-old?
That could be very true. And also it may be not being culturally competent to where they think that it's really important to know the supervisors or to know the commander.
Yeah.
Or, to be honest, I think some chaplains think it's cool. Like, I'm hanging out with the captain or the major.
They're rubbing shoulders with important people. Yes. I have no doubt some people think that way.
just like doing invocations. Yep. Do you want to jump at the chance to pray at a formal event?
Sure.
But when's the last time you rode on the graveyard shift or the evening shift?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they'd rather sit on stage with the chief and the mayor than sit in the car with the patrol officer. That,
and also a lot of, quote, police chaplains are dedicated to the community. So they will respond if a citizen has a car wreck, a suicide, accidental death. Right. They seem gung-ho to respond to people in the community. So most cops I've encountered in the last, it's 3 or 4 years I've been doing this, they're like, I didn't know that chaplains were for the cops. I know you guys show up at critical incidents, but I thought you were just for the community. So they're like, this is so weird that you're saying you're there to support us. And It's also very weird that when you start riding along every week and then you observe canine and SWAT training and you go work out at the station gym and you're hanging around and you're going to briefings and you're talking to them about things that aren't religious, because the perception also is, well, chaplains are religious people that are here for religious reasons only, and they're not familiar with Lemon versus Kurtzman.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's a lot of the stereotypes from the cops' perspective, because I hear cops talk about that all the time. Man, I don't know who that guy is, but the few times I've seen him or her, they're talking to the brass, they're praying at an event and they're being very preachy and it sounds judgmental, or it's turning me off because I don't interpret the Bible the same way they were, screaming, Lord, this and Satan's
Right.
coming and you're going to hell.
Right.
And they don't know anything about me. And if they show up at a critical incident and they've never rode along and hung out at the station, I'm not going to trust them.
Yeah. They feel like a stranger. Yeah.
Yeah. And our job is to learn about the officers, the culture at the station, the culture at the department. They're the teachers.
Yeah.
And
So let's break that down a little bit.
Okay.
You mentioned those that are law enforcement chaplains. They have the jacket, right? That says chaplain across the back. And they show up and they're gung ho to focus on the community. Now I know there are some cities around the country that have, very well developed chaplaincy programs, and some of them call those community chaplains. And they're there to interface with, the community leaders, and they are plugged in. They know people. They maybe even know the victims already because they're in the community and they have those connections. And that's great. I am not saying, and I don't think you're saying either, that we don't want those people. I think that's a role that's important. That's a type of chaplain.
absolutely.
And there's lots of different types of chaplains. People see chaplains at hospitals and at hospice places, and sometimes in the corporate world, and of course in the military and whatever else. But just because someone has the name or title chaplain doesn't mean that they're functioning in the same way. And that's what I'm wanting to try to draw distinctions around. When you talk about a prison chaplain or a community chaplain and a lot of hospital chaplains, it seems to me that those people are helping the victims. They're helping the people who are incarcerated. They're helping the people who are hurting. They're helping those they're out there hurting. They're not helping the professionals. Most prison chaplains, I presume, are not necessarily ministering to the guards. They're there for the prisoners, right?
Yeah.
In the hospital, they're there for the patients and the patients' families, not necessarily the doctors and nurses, right?
So I wouldn't mind, and this is going to take some legwork, and I'm going to try to do it with one department, have a list of community chaplains, which are the clergy for the different faiths in that community. And then if you have a call list and the community requests someone, well, if they're Catholic, if they're Jewish, if they're Muslim, if they're Baptist, then find the clergy in the community to respond to the call. They might even be a member of that community or congregation.
Right.
But patrol chaplains, I would equate more to the military chaplain model, which is you get initiated into the culture. Like a military chaplain goes through a boot camp and lives on base and deploys with the troops and is there for the troops. It's not like they're there for when something happens during combat, they're going out to help people in the community. I'm sure they might in some situations, but their primary role is to know and build rapport long-term with the members of the military. Yeah. And if you're a hospital, hospice chaplain, some of these other things you mentioned, I think CPE's, clinical pastoral education, is great training because it's in deep spirituality, ecumenical, interfaith, and they make you work on yourself and become a very good listener. But most people are in crisis or in a very vulnerable position, which makes them way more open. Also, you're a stranger. It is often easier for us to go to or be in the presence of, if I have an anonymous therapist that I know is never going to talk to my coworkers, my bosses, or put me up for a fit for duty, or somebody finds out that I even spoke to a chaplain or a therapist, well, am I not going to get promoted to detective? Am I not going to make SWAT gang canine because I'm, quote, weak? If I'm in a hospital or I'm in hospice and, end of life or serious critical, situations where I'm vulnerable, it's great to unload confidentially to an anonymous person that's never going to talk to anybody I know. And I might be at the point, where I'm willing to do that because I'm in so much pain. But cops, we know they suck it up. They don't trust people, especially in this culture. Right. So you need long-term relationships where you build rapport and you learn the culture. And unfortunately, even, quote, like a lot of patrol or community chaplains, police chaplains, 90% of the training from the different organizations is PTSD, addiction, suicide. And if you do come to a briefing, you do peer support or chaplain training for the cops, You're the people talking about PTSD, addiction, suicide, which is a journey to get to that point. And also now you've stigmatized yourself that if you're talking to the chaplain, peer support, or the mental health professional, you must be one of the broken, crazy, or weak ones. And nobody wants to stigmatize themselves. So we're dealing with people.
It's reactive.
It's totally reactive.
Yeah. And it's reactive to only the worst things.
Yeah.
Right.
So are we talking to them about sleep and nutrition, or not lecturing and not giving unsolicited advice? But if you build long-term relationships, these things come up. Things will come up slowly, and it can take a year or two. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
You might have to ride and visit the station for a year or two. And then maybe if there is a critical incident and you show up and they have the relationship, well, maybe they're not going to talk to you on scene all the time, but they'll send you a text afterwards. Hey, can we get a cup of coffee, or talk on the phone? They're still going to be guarded about their chatting you up with the deeper things. But if you're around the station and riding a lot, it's no longer a stigma to talk to the chaplain, because you're just more a normal part of the, quote, family.
They've already had 1,000 casual conversations. It's no longer, like you said, stigmatized to pull the chaplain aside to talk to him, because the officers have seen it already with a patrol chaplain. Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's do a better job of comparing and contrasting, because you have these two very different mindsets, one that's directed more toward the community, not the officers, and one that's directed toward the officers, not the community. I'm not saying either one is wrong, but I feel like one is getting neglected. The one that you're advocating for is being neglected, that these officers don't have help until after something critical has happened. I guess what I want to ask is how do law enforcement chaplains drift off course with that? I mean, their mission, well, maybe I'm assuming too much. Maybe their mission never was to the officers, but it doesn't seem like the officers are being served. It seems like the community is being served. The victims of crime are being served, which is good. Yeah. But didn't the chaplain want to serve the police department? So how does that happen? Why does that happen? Why did they drift away from the cops?
I don't know, but I mean, ever since I entered this field of law enforcement, I've barely seen the chaplains, or a lot of places, quote, don't even have chaplains. And if they do, it's on paper only. Right. Nobody knows who they are. And even the ones that I think with good intentions, like there's chaplains out there that have 20 different police chaplain certifications, critical incident training, certs, this, that. And they're super gung ho. But if you're barely showing up, and when you show up, you talk to commanders, or you pray in a preachy way, and you do one ride along a year, and it's a half a shift on day shift when nothing big is happening, it's report only. Right. The cops likely aren't going to trust you. But I know people like that have amazing intentions. They're just not actually culturally competent. You can do all the PowerPoint certifications in the world. It doesn't mean you understand cops or how to talk to cops. Define that term for me. What is cultural competence? Do you understand how cops eat, breathe, sleep, talk, socialize, and what are their views and perspectives on the world? Do you understand their language? Do you understand even the codes for the different departments of the calls that they're on? Or do you even understand the types of calls that they're talking about? Or do you have to stop and ask questions, or they can tell you don't understand what a code is? Right. Or what this type of call is. How do you get cultural competence? This is just my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right. I've been through some police chaplain certifications that I thought were like so bare bones and basic. And then other people raved like, wow, that was so informative. And I'm like, you can watch cop movies and do these PowerPoints and these certifications, but every cop, every station, and every department has a different culture. And the only way you learn about that is spending time in the trenches. So like I suggest, at least up front, if there was like, say, an FTO period for chaplains or a probationary period, just like there are for cops, I think you should ride once a week, and on at least initially, or twice a month for a certain period of time. One, to be showing your face and becoming a more normal part of that station or department. And two, just to learn the people and the shifts. Like I tell chiefs of police that when I presented at IACP, do you know who your chaplain is? Would you recognize them in public? Do they know your name? Do they know anything about you? Do you have their email and cell phone number? And do you feel comfortable reaching out to them? When they walk into a briefing or a roll call, how do the cops interact? Is it sir, ma'am, and like peel out of there as fast as possible, and nobody cusses and nobody does the dark humor? Like everybody's super serious and filtered around you? Or do they give you knuckles, a handshake, a half bro hug, and say, "What's up, chap?" or "What's up, Matt? How you doing? Haven't seen you in a while," whatever it is.
Right.
So you have to build rapport through just spending time in briefings. If you can observe training or even participate, I've been fortunate enough to get to do like pit and pursuit training, firearms training, and I am a retired cop, so it's probably easier for them to let me sneak into some of that stuff. But
right.
What can you do to be in their environment as much as possible to understand their way of life and understand the work they're doing, and to where their guard comes down and they start talking to you more authentically and honestly about, "Hey man, this sucks. This sucks that the news said this about our department. This sucks that so-and-so is being investigated by the DA for a completely good shooting.
Yeah.
It sucks that we have whatever's going on in the department or in the country," and they can be more honest with you. And also they want to share good stories too. If you hang around enough, they'll start telling you about who they're dating or what their kids are up to. And
we need chaplains who are willing to befriend them. And I think maybe that uncovers the problem why we don't have more chaplains with a patrol chaplain mentality, because what you're describing is a lot of work. That's a big commitment. And it's a lot easier with people who have all the certifications to just drop in after a critical incident and show up and see if anyone wants to take them up on the offer of getting some counseling. And they probably don't get very many takers, but that's okay. You can't force it. And they pat themselves on the back and walk away. And I'm not meaning to be so critical, but really the hard work would be showing up week after week, month after month, maybe for years, because getting behind the badge can take a year or 2 or 3. And that clock starts differently with each officer. And so every time there's a new batch come out of the academy, the clock starts over for me. And so now I know it's going to be another year or 2 before these new officers really are comfortable with me. And I'm going to have to show up again and again and again and again. And I think a lot of people, even people who are chaplains in other contexts, are not willing to put in that kind of effort. They can't do it.
They may not have the time. Like I mean, this is a stereotype too. There's clergy that it seems like it's super sexy to say you're a police chaplain, but you have absolutely no time because the bread you put on the table is taking care of your congregation. Like my ex-girlfriend, who I'm super close to because I helped raise her kids, she sent me this email a couple years ago. She's a nurse at a prestigious hospital in LA. And it was the announcement for the hospital of the new lead chaplain, who probably makes 6 figures. And it had, I think this guy obviously had an MDiv. I think he might even had a PhD in theology. I mean, impeccable background.
Sure.
And then at the bottom, it says how passionate he is about first responders because he's the police chaplain for one of the departments that I work for. And I was like, no idea who this guy is.
I've never seen him. Right.
Yeah, and I asked a couple cops, no idea who he is. So there's this thing, and just like I have a background in sports psychology, there's sometimes these kind of nerdy, dorky clinical psychologists that have never played a sport. They don't eat healthy. They don't work out, but they want to do a certification in sports psych and then try to say that I'm working with athletes like it's super sexy, but they know nothing about the grind or the lifestyle and the effort and the experience of an athlete. So
I want to see authentic chaplains who are culturally competent and are invested in their department. And I know that's difficult if you work in a church or you're a religious worker, and that's your full-time job. And you're like, boy, how in the world can I add this on top of what I already do? I know the joke is that preachers only work for an hour on Sunday morning, but the reality is, I mean, for me in my church, I work 6 days a week. My day off floats during the course of the week, depending on my family's schedule. And a light week is 50 or 60 hours. And so I understand being busy with church work, but I'm not trying to be a chaplain 3 towns away. I mean, I'm a chaplain literally the police station is just a few miles down the street from me. And it's right next to my dry cleaner. And I'm not going to go there unless I can also, to the dry cleaner, unless I can also time it so I can stop at the police station during a shift change. And I just have worked that into my life. I really don't spend a huge amount of time doing the chaplain thing, but I do it all the time because I've worked it in here and there in all different parts of my life. And that includes ride-alongs. I'll go on an 8-hour ride-along. And granted, that I have to plan in advance when I'm going to be on an 8-hour shift. I mean, that's different. But I can do it. And I can do it wisely so that I can still do all the things that, pay the bills, because most police chaplaincy is not going to pay. I mean, that's another thing. A lot of people who want to make a career out of being a chaplain, they're drawn to the hospital chaplain positions, the very few that pay, because they pay well. And I shouldn't say that. In some cases, they pay well. And other chaplain positions don't pay anything. And so they're like, well, I don't want that one, but we desperately need, that's where the need is. The need is in your random sheriff's office or police department or fire department where they don't have anybody taking care of those first responders. Nobody is getting to know them. Nobody is spending time with them without also coming in and asking for stuff or trying to convert them all on the spot and drag them to their church kicking and screaming. I mean, that happens, unfortunately, which gives chaplains a bad name. But
it does. I mean, here's another thing that you have to overcome. Cops are super sarcastic. If you know Kevin Gilmartin, an emotional survivor for law enforcement, he does word association. And he's like, hey, cops see the worst of each type of person. So when you say scout leader or priest, cops will say pedophile.
Right.
Well, chaplain, the chaplain label gets you stereotyped as whoever the worst TV preacher, scandal, or hypocritical religious person that they may have grown up with, or been in school with, or has judged or told them, So the worst stereotype that somebody has of religion often is what the cops will think when you're chaplain. So if you're not around to show your humanity, and they get to know more about you outside of your religious title, that also is going to possibly prevent and deter people other than the ones that are already super religious maybe and are maybe want to talk to you. But I'm not worried about the cop that goes on Bible study retreats with his wife, has a men's group, has a faith community that is supporting him. There's a whole lot of cops that have been turned away or even traumatized by organized religion, or just the fact that some of our childhood religious and spiritual formation does not align with what you're going to experience as a cop.
Right.
It's just not going to answer those questions.
The cop has trouble reconciling it. Because they've never had anybody who understood what they were going through and couldn't help them reconcile it. And so, I would like to see these patrol chaplains, as we're calling them, chaplains specifically that are focused on the first responders themselves, commit the time to get to know them. And if this is not the path to get a lot of money. This is not the path to ever make yourself famous. This is not a path to, be the chaplain 2000s. No, you really, if you're a good patrol chaplain, you're probably never going to be a chaplain to more than maybe a few hundred at a time. It's just not possible, because how many people can genuinely know you and trust you at any given time? That number's going to have a very natural ceiling to it.
Totally. Like I used to think, because other departments were like, hey, Matt, we want to bring you in, our peer support and or chaplain. And I've realized that right now, like 2 stations, to be attentive to 2 stations is a full-time job. If I'm going to ride, be at the station, stay in communication with people. And I'm medically retired, so I'm doing this full-time. And I do peer support via phone and email through other nonprofits and just networks, police psychologists, lawyers that represent cops. I get referred people. So I'm kind of full-time peer support chaplain, but 2 stations is my max. I'll help cops from anywhere. Yeah. But if you're going to put the time in, there definitely is a limitation if you want to be effective.
And the more I do this, the more I realize, because at first I thought, well, my chaplains association here in Kansas City covers sheriff's office, fire department, police department. I'm chaplain to 1,000 people. Well, no, the more I'm into this, no, I really need to focus on the police department. And then I thought, really, I need to focus on patrol because I don't hardly have time to meet all the patrol officers and get to know them well. I can't also be the chaplain to the detectives and whatever else. I need to focus more than what I was doing. And that has benefited me to focus more narrowly and be a chaplain to fewer people. But now I desperately need to raise up more chaplains because I'd like to have a chaplain for the detectives and a chaplain for the CSI and a chaplain for the dispatchers. I'd like to bring in more chaplains because I can't possibly do what we're talking about well with too large of a crowd. Once it gets past a couple hundred people, that's too much. And so, yeah.
And I know people that will list on their resume 10 departments, right? Like I'm with the FBI, I'm with the LAPD, I'm with this, I'm with that. And
like,
also
how?
I would say, but does anybody know you at the FBI, at the station that you're saying that you're at? And I'd also be leery because this is what cops tell me, like they don't want people walking around in religious uniforms, or if it looks like it's more about you, and this might sound like I'm judging other chaplains, but if everything you wear is a baseball hat and a jacket and everything has foot tall block letters of chaplain,
right.
Like that turns people off. And I hear it all the time. And the cops are just like, I work out at the stations, and plenty of times I've had people earlier on saying, "Hey man, it's so cool that you're here just in workout clothes because you seem like a normal guy." It kind of like makes it a little easier to approach you initially versus if you were showing up in a uniform or things. I'm chaplain this, chaplain that.
Yeah,
so
there are certain contexts in which it might benefit a chaplain to remove the collar tab and be more approachable. And there are places for uniform. If I'm out on a crime scene, I'm putting on the jacket with the big tall block letters because I need to be identifiable in the dark, in a crowd, whatever. But in the station, it's probably better if I'm at a roll call. It's probably better that I'm just in comfortable civilian clothes and I'm approachable. And that is my attire. That's my attitude, my demeanor, everything about me. I need to be thinking, how approachable can I be so that I can work on building rapport? Can I laugh at the jokes? Can they be comfortable enough? Because some, if they're comfortable, are going to cuss. Some of them, if they're comfortable, they're not going to cuss. But I'm not like imposing an artificial atmosphere. And they're like, as soon as I leave the room, they take a deep breath. Finally, he's gone. I'm trying to prevent that.
I was just talking to one of my supervisors at one of the places I'm at because the lead chaplain retired, and he's like, "Hey Matt, you want the lead chaplain job?" I'm like, "Well, what does that even mean?" Nobody even knows what any of us do, other than they know that they think I'm the weirdo in a good way because I'm hanging around.
Right.
He's like, "Well, what would you do?" And then I talked to him about what we're talking about, and I'm like, "Hey, I think if we could look, there's a lot of good ministries out there where lay people do a fantastic job, including like I was involved in sports ministry, AIA, FCA, Hockey Ministry International. Not everybody's a pastor or a priest or anything like that. There's people, and including maybe retired first responders and veterans that understand the culture, a piece of the culture, and they have a faith life, and maybe we require some kind of go through the police chaplain certifications. I believe a CPE or spiritual direction school, things that people may not be familiar with, they're more about active listening, and they make you dig deep into your own faith life, because we can only see people as deeply as we can see ourselves. If we're not aware of who we are, well, we're going to have a hard time being aware of others. So, there's training out there that may not be the traditional police chaplain training, that we can recruit lay people who understand the culture and have the time and miss the community like me.
Yeah.
I miss the police community. So I get to go hang out with cops, and I'm in LA where a lot of people hate police. So I can go be myself around people that share a lot of the same perspectives and values that I do. And it's healing and healthy for my own personal life to be with the cops. And I know there'd be other retired cops that might be great chaplains as well and want to do the ride-alongs and visit the roll calls and the briefings and things like that.
Yeah, I am actively looking for that very thing. I would like to draw in more chaplains here in Kansas City and I'm looking at retired first responders who might be spiritually mature enough to do this, because a retiree has to understand they're a retiree. They can't think, oh, I'm back on the job. You're not. No, you're not. No, you're not.
No.
Every chaplain has to do that, because there's some chaplains who think, ooh, this is so exciting, I'm going to go solve crimes. No, you're not going to go solve crimes. You're going to be a chaplain, and you'll be adjacent to people who are solving crimes. But it's not your job to find the criminal or whatever. But I think a retiree could really help. Because they have the time, they have the cultural competency, they have a few things that some of these pastors don't. And some of the pastors, some of the best chaplains I've ever met have been church pastors, but some of the worst ones I've ever met have been church pastors, because they could not get themselves out of the frame of mind that everything is about drawing people into their church, into their congregation. And you have to be more selfless than that. You have to be willing, like, I'm going to help this totally secular young cop who has never been in church, has no interest in going to church, but I am still going to help him with his mental wellness, even if it never benefits me, even if he never visits my church ever. Maybe even my help might push him to a different kind of church or a different religion. And you're like, you have to be able to accept that and be okay with it, or you can't be a good chaplain. You're too selfish. You're too selfish. You can only benefit your own congregation. Then you're not going to make a good patrol chaplain.
And also, there's good information and training on wellness and resiliency that's good for peer support. And I think there's a lot of crossover between a chaplain and peer support. So you learn more about mental health, sleep, even nutrition, stress management, self-regulation, and also post-traumatic growth. Things like that are, I think, important, and a lot of active listening, and also a lot of learning about yourself. And spiritual direction and CPEs are training where you have to dig deep into your own life. It's not just learn this strict theology for this narrow flavor of religiosity and bring people to that.
Well, and let me speak to someone, because I belong to a type of church where evangelism is very important. Going and making converts and bringing them in is something that is a fundamental core aspect of our culture and our belief system. What I want to say to that person is that I have been a patrol chaplain type police chaplain for about 4 or 5 years now. And I do not think that being an honest, giving, selfless chaplain has hurt that cause at all. Now, did I corner somebody in a vulnerable moment and start preaching at them? No. Maybe some people thought I maybe should have, but I think I've actually made more ground long term with a lot of these people. And I don't know if they'll ever come to my church. Maybe they won't. But I really think I'm making an impact positively for religion by not being a creep about my religion.
Amen.
And so I really think I'm helping the spiritual atmosphere in my department by not being overbearing and not being selfish. And so I really think it's a very slow form of evangelism compared to what I am naturally comfortable with, but I'm able to adapt to that, and I think that it's still serving the same purpose. I think that I'm pushing people toward God in this way, but I'm just not doing it overtly and like in the short term.
So, there's a quote I love. It's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. Preach the gospel at all times. When absolutely necessary, use words.
Right.
So practice what you preach. If somebody knows you're the religious cop, which was kind of like what I was known as when I was a cop, or you're the chaplain, they know you're a religious figure. Now, if you listen attentively, you are authentic, you care about people. Yeah. They share their stories and they do not feel judged, and you do not give unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
You are being the hands and feet of Christ. You are being, I think, you're evangelizing in a manner because of how you make people feel. And if you're the, quote, religious person, they know where your inspiration, they know where your strength comes from. You don't have to tell them.
Yeah, this may be more effective evangelism for that culture, or at least for that subculture, than what we're usually trained in as this is stereotypical evangelism.
Yeah, because even as a Christian, I bump into people that are Christian and they don't even get to know my story. And then they start giving me their 10 steps to Jesus. And it's like, wow, they don't even know. Or what church do you attend? They want to know what church you attend to narrow down your denomination to let you know that you're not right. Like, I'll tell you, I'm a cradle Catholic. And I always told people I'm very ecumenical. And I've been super influenced by Catholicism, the contemplative Christian tradition, and evangelicals, because I've spent so much time in fellowship and training with evangelicals too. Mm-hmm. But I don't tell people, hey, I'm a cradle Catholic, because I know people that have come to me for prayer and kind of like mentorship as a cop for years. And then 2 years later, they find out I'm a Catholic and they're like,
now they have to convert you.
No, they'll be oh my God, I was trained that Catholics don't know Jesus, don't believe in the Bible, they worship Mary. Then you hear all these things that they've been told growing up in their church.
Right.
But they're like, but you haven't been all those things. Like you do know Christ, or you do talk about scripture or whatever. So we have bias and stereotypes of people too, if we lay down, or everybody has an unconscious bias. And again, going back to those negative experiences of some hypocritical or judgmental religious person, if you start showing your quote religious cards, you're going to shut a lot of people down, especially hard cops that have been exposed to the worst of the worst and are typically very guarded and sarcastic. And quite frankly, forgive my language, have amazing detectors.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're going to have an ulterior motive and you're really becoming a patrol chaplain because you want to get all those cops to come to your church, this is the crowd that's going to sniff that out in about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're going to know, they're going to see that you're in this for yourself and you're trying to puff up your own name or the name of your church, and you're not really there for them. And they're going to, they're cynical enough that they assume that that's the case to start with. And as soon as you prove them right, they're done with you.
Yeah. And then also you just painted anybody else that comes after you that's a chaplain.
Yes.
Like,
you've ruined it for every other chaplain for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Way to go. Yeah. Excellent. Did we cover everything?
Cultural competency, long-term relationships of trust, time in the trenches, being a good listener. We're not the teachers or the gurus. We want to learn about every individual person, station, and the department culture. I think we covered like the things that I think are most important.
Okay. So what do you want to do as a patrol chaplain in the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see yourself?
As we talked about a little bit, I want to try to influence the recruiting of other retired first responders and maybe start putting on retreats and workshops that do training that is more proactive, wellness, resiliency, post-traumatic growth. And we're going to try to proactively talk about the inner life or the spiritual life in a non-threatening way. So it's not, like you don't have to be religious or any brand of religion to come. And can we recruit more lay people, perhaps, that have more time, like we discussed?
Right.
And get training in active listening and meaning making. How can you continue to find meaning and purpose through the immersion of suffering and misery of the people that you meet on these calls, and where it's not stigmatized to process your thoughts, your feelings? I would like to further the wellness, resiliency, the broader spirituality that's proactive, giving cops swimming lessons for the rough waters we know they're going to enter, destigmatize self-care, destigmatize seeking help, destigmatize having balance in life. So let's not give the badge of honor to the guy that works the overtime, drinks 3 Red Bulls, 3 Starbucks, McDonald's, right? That's a badge of honor in the police world.
Yeah.
That dude worked all this overtime. But that guy's
it's a bit of a martyr. It's a bit of a martyr's complex. Yeah. Look at how badly I take care of myself. Yeah.
So let's I would like to further the proactive wellness, resiliency, meaning making, post-traumatic growth across the board with chaplains, peer support, and mental health professionals, because we should all be working together. I think it's all the same team, a lot of crossover, and we should be able to refer people. Like I one of my biggest things is trying to refer people to therapy. And if there's people with substance abuse issues, to get substance abuse help and destigmatize it. So that would be my goal, is how can we get more people to think about this patrol chaplaincy so we're serving the cops. Let's get more chaplains serving the cops at this very difficult time in our history to be a cop. And can we be more proactive versus the reactive PTSD, suicide addiction?
Right. Yeah. Boy, you've got me convinced. My personal goal, I mean, the way I'd answer that is I really hope for the next 20 years, that would take me into my mid-60s, that for the next 20 years that I can be a patrol chaplain and be riding along and at roll calls with young 25-year-old police officers. And that maybe at the end of that time period, then I'm going to be old enough, like their grandfather's age, right? And so maybe some of the patrol officers I'm with right now will have risen up through the ranks. And maybe at that point, I would transition into kind of semi-retirement where I'd be a chaplain to executive leadership. And I would know the sheriff because I've known him for 20 years. And I would know the police chief because I've known him for 25 years or whatever. And so maybe at that point I would kind of transition at that stage. But really for the next 20 years, I want to do what I'm doing right now. And I want to do it in the way that you're describing. And so that's my ambition.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you, Matt. This is fantastic.
Thank you, Jared. Always a pleasure offline or officially on a podcast to get to talk and share ideas. And it's very inspiring for me to know there's other people like you out there that, want to serve these cops more during these difficult seasons that they're dealing with.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much.
God bless you. Have a great day.
Let me address the chaplains that we have in the audience. This isn't meant to condemn you or toss you aside. It's meant to challenge you. You can go spend time with cops today. Please do it. But be warned that it is a heavy responsibility. It takes training and it takes time to get behind the badge. The specific kind of chaplaincy that Matt and I are advocating here is the least popular, the most demanding, and the least likely to come with an earthly paycheck. But it is worth it. Those young officers keeping us safe every day are worth it. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
We were always been represented by Chicago. The Chicago outfit has always kind of been our voice with the national crime syndicate.
Okay.
And so there's an early meeting, Al Capone went to it in the 20s about prohibition and setting everything up into territories, who had what territories. And, out of New York, people came, Cleveland, all the major families came. And so Kansas City then fell under Chicago at that time, although we do have our own family with a boss and a hierarchy that's just Kansas City. In Kansas City, we're kind of like the little brother to Chicago, shall we say.
Okay.
We act on our own, but if it looks like it might get anywhere close to Chicago and their domain, then they're going to run it by Chicago first.
Right. The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening today. And as always, pray for peace in our city.